And we are live. Welcome everyone who is joining and listening to this webinar today about the smart way to scale SaaS revenue without breaking the bank. We will dive into fractional roles today. And first, some hygienics. I will move us over to the panel so we can see our amazing guest and myself. So some hygienics, there is a side where you can write commentary in a chat. If you are wanting to engage with us or asking questions, there's also a question tab that you can use. And then I will push the question up either through the webinar or at the end. We will have a Q&A at the end. But if the question is relative to whatever we're talking about in the moment, please feel free to push it in as a question. You can also write your message in the chat, and I will give you guys a chance to find the chat by saying hi in it. Here we go. Please feel free to use the chat as much as you want. With this in mind, we have an hour today that we will talk about fractional. So first, we will start with doing an introduction of our panelists and experts. So I will move the mic over to George to start, and then Greg will go next, and then Dan, and then me. Let's see if we can keep that in mind. George, go ahead and introduce yourself to the crowd.
Yes. So my name is George, and I am the CEO of Break the Box. I've been in sales and revenue operations for more than half my life, actually, 22 years, and I'm 40. So I've been through all the roles from SDR to CRO, and currently I am doing fractional work, amongst other things, which I have realized most people don't know what it means, but we will get into that in a bit. And that's me for now.
Great stuff. Cheers, George. I'm Greg, founder of GC Search. Similar to George, been doing recruitment for sort of 19 years or so now, which quite a long time. Primarily focused on tech hiring, engineering, and data science in that kind of space, and just seeing more and more upcoming fractional leaders coming through, and more demand from the market that we're looking at as to different ways of them expanding their team using fractional approach, interim approach, and different sides. So here to talk about that. Dan?
Perfect, Dan, let's go.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. Dan, founder at P2 Growth. Been in recruitment for a long time, not quite as long as Greg, but I think 14 or 15 years now, and recently founded this business. So, essentially what we do at P2 is we help startups to build talent teams in association with growing revenue and go-to-market. So certainly the fractional piece is quite close to my heart, and I see a lot of hiring in this space. So that's me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I will save my introductions for last. So my name is Sarah. I'm the CRO at Break the Box, and I am extra excited for this topic because I've been in sales for 22 years, my entire career. I see that fractional is making a move when it comes to specifically sales. We're also seeing changes happening when it comes to sizes of teams. We're downsizing. We're trying to go up market. A lot of things are happening on the sales side when it comes to this, which makes fractional leaders make more sense. And with that in mind, I would actually like us to dive into the first part of the webinar, which has to do with the following question. So what the F is fractional? And with that in mind, with this question in mind, I will actually move us over again to the panel so we can have some input. I will start with my short definition. So basically, fractional roles for me is a leader who goes in full-time or part-time, working with a specific goal in mind over a period of time, not as an employee, but as a consultant, bringing expertise to the table. And on the sales side, since both me and George both do this type of roles, it can be everything from lower level leaders like BDR leaders or SDR leaders, AE leaders, up to CRO leadership, right? So what is the point of fractional? Why is it going on, and what's happening with that? I'm going to move that over to Dan, I think, who can take the ball.
Yeah, sure. I think there's probably some historical market context, which I think is important to mention. So if you look at, there was this huge hiring boom post-COVID, right? And I think, from a hiring perspective, there was a lot of investment in the market, a lot of, investment firms were deploying capital. So I think there was a lot of hiring, and, you could only wave a CV in the air and you were making a placement. Should have probably started the business then. But I think what we saw is this huge recruitment drive, right? And I think when the market changed overnight, quite literally, I think a lot of businesses felt the pain of poor hiring. So I think that there was a lot of hiring happening without necessarily a strategic direction, and it was more, I guess, if I talk from a revenue perspective, let's hire a VP of sales. There's our silver bullet and more 10x revenue. So I think what's happened is that's a very generalist outlook, but I think a lot of businesses have realized that in order to scale and build, there needs to be proper foundations in place. So I think actually hiring fractionals, when I say fractionals, people that have been there and done it and have been on the journey that those businesses need to go on, they're seeing there's a desire and need to bring those people into the business. So yeah, I think it's driven by market dynamics, and we'll get into probably more of that during the webinar. But I think that's for me why fractionals are needed and are more on the rise, and will continue to be, I'm sure.
Yeah, I also feel like the connection to risk is so evident right now in the market we are in. Greg, what is your take on sort of what fractional is and where we're going and what's going on in the market right now?
Yeah, I think Dan gave a good definition there of where it covers, and I think there's quite often a bit of a misconstrued idea between interim and a fractional leader as to what they can do. And I think we've got a document that will be coming out post this webinar that will kind of go into some of that as well. But I think the big part that we're seeing is probably a little bit of a steadying hand from some of the VCs, private equity companies that are coming in and are investing in these startup scale-ups, and actually looking to see that there's somebody in there who's been there and done that with a path to profitability, or actually built something that's moved on to maybe an exit, maybe a sale or an acquisition, but seen that growth in times where money wasn't freely abundant. That post-COVID boom, as Dan alluded to, CV in the air and you got a placement. I wish that had always been the case, but I think it was equally, and there's lots of comedy sketches that are on LinkedIn that we all see of post-COVID meeting your VC in 2020. They couldn't write a check quick enough, whereas trying to meet them now, they really want to know absolutely everything about you, your background, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how you're going to hit that profitability. And so I think that rise in fractional leadership has come by having a bit of a niche in the market for people like yourself, Sarah and George, who've been there and done that in other organizations and actually been able to show a case study for saying, not only have I done it here, but I've, advised on these 3, 4, 5 other companies that have also projected and hit this, growth plan going forward. So I think that's what we're seeing, and seeing just a little bit more demand from the market for this experienced leadership to come in and have these impacts, and they can have an impact across a wider VC's portfolio or across, a variety of companies that sit within different venture capitalists' portfolios.
But I also think it's interesting because you mentioned sort of having a track record of being able to provide and deliver whatever is needed for the company at the time, right? But what is that? Is that really that different from a senior leader who's been employed role after role after role, getting that track record with employment instead? Like from a specific, like, do you feel like the demands of a fractional role is a lot higher in the customer's perspective than it is when you hire someone? Or do you see
I think it's the access or the availability of those people. There's the huge one that seems to be in the press all the time about the Starbucks CEO being flown from California to Seattle every day and his carbon footprint. And I won't go into all of that sort of side of things, but that's a full-time hire that they've done there, and a reason to do it. I don't think it would have ever made the press if that had been a fractional leader coming in to advise them on strategy of what they were doing. But I think what some companies need to look at is it's maybe not the right time to be hiring that full-time executive in that role by way of financials. Some of these people are very, very expensive, and rightly so. But equally, you might not have enough work for them to be doing because the business is still in its infancy. Both yourself and George have managed SDRs, AEs, any variety of level within the sales function. When a business is really in its early stages, it hasn't got the funds and the stability to have a VP of sales or a CRO, a VP of sales, a sales director, sales manager, and then only maybe one person on the phone.
No, they will hire a country lead, and that is a salesperson. Like, this is what's going to happen with that. No, but I understand what you mean. But one of the things that I thought about since we started doing fractional work, because me and George both have all the leader positions as employed as well. For me, my experience is also that there is a time and place for everything. There is a need that separates depending on what you're doing. Like if you're going to build a completely new motion, let's say that you're going to go towards an enterprise motion and you are an SMB company, like the entire culture is based around SMB. Is it better than to take in a person who's a fractional leader to build that organization and then hand it over to VP sales of enterprise? Or is it better to hire that VP directly, make that person make all the mistakes with their team? Like these are the discussions. I'm sure as a customer, I would question for myself, like what is the right path to go? And we will dive into when is a good time. But I just feel like there is a different framework when you look at hiring a fractional, because you're looking at whatever they're going to invoice rather than comparing to actual salary costs, right? You don't understand the correlation, how some invoices are basically cheaper than the salary if you look at it overall, right? George, what is your take on it?
Yeah, no, the first thing that I need to say is not to contradict Greg there, but I think that especially first of all, the risk for hiring is insane in most occasions. The cost is a lot, especially for senior management roles. So changes in leadership are a lot more impactful than it is to change or replace an individual contributor. The impact in the organization is higher. I agree with Sarah. It is a bit dependent on what you want to do and if you have the internal competence to do that. What we saw in SaaS is that everyone and their cousins and mothers were promoted from individual contributors to managers. And then there is a big question. Everybody is dumbfounded why we have no strategy, why we have no go-to-market, why are people leaving, etc., etc., etc. But what I sort of disagree with Greg is that, yeah, it's great to have a track record on paper. I have seen several managers come and go in employment where they worked senior roles in, I don't know, Microsoft and Apple and HBO and what have you. And you see their LinkedIn or you see the resume. It's like, oh my God, this is incredible. It's so much expertise. And then you hire them and there is nothing on the table, to be honest. And then there is organizational changes and stuff like that. So I think purely from a risk perspective, it feels a lot easier. It feels safer, especially for people that haven't only stayed in one organization. They have current inputs from the market, not only from how that organization works, but how 10, 15, 20 organizations work at the same time currently now and how the market develops. And also it's something that has to do with basically a short-term contract that you can look at as a project instead of a full hire. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, do we all agree on that when it comes to risk, right? I'm sure you guys see a lot since you're doing recruitment ongoingly that this is a challenge, right?
Yeah, hugely. Yeah, I think on Greg's point, the access to people as well, and I think the important thing to note is if you're hiring a permanent full-time person to go on the journey with that business and help them get to whatever milestone, I think those people are out of reach because they've done that and they've potentially moved on to something else. And I think that's the key differential. And they're really, really hard to find where, I think with fractionals, they can be, most businesses like myself, we've got a network of those people that could be deployed within 48 hours. In a lot of cases, I think someone said this to me the other week, and I can't remember who said it to me, but it was another fractional leader. And I think this is another key point, is the dynamic between founder and fractional leader is totally different whether you're a permanent person. So if you're a full-time person, you're on probation, you're there to make an impact, but you're probably there to also look after your job, make sure you're impressing, build the relationship with the founder. But the fractional from day one will be straight to the point, will pick up that founder if they're out of sync or they're not calling the shots correctly. So I think actually the impact can be much quicker and greater just because the dynamic shift is much different.
Right, it's a power dynamic.
100%. I think they're more on level. Yeah, exactly. They're more level, Whereas by virtue of hiring someone as employee, they're not. So I think that's often an overlooked dynamic that can make a big difference too.
That's so interesting, because basically what you're telling me, Stan, now is that as an employee, if you want to keep being employed, you need to start acting like the fractional. No, but seriously, because we bounce into this over and over and over again. We will come in as a fractional leader in whatever capacity in a company, big or small, because we do both scale ups and startups, right? And it's very different when it's a startup and they're small. It is different because it's the founder's wallet and all of this personal finance. Like it's a very different game. But when you come into bigger organizations, and this has happened to us several times, you come in, you start executing, you start questioning, challenging, and being, because at least us as people, we're very challenging, right? We're challenging because that's what you hired us as a fractional to be. I think that when you look at them, people who are employed, they will go at a slower pace because they are employed. And this is one of the challenges, right? This will lead to you having trouble maintaining in your role, because it can take in a fractional who gets so much more work done and who is a lot faster and who also challenges our leader group. And this is required in sales and marketing roles, in CFO roles, in all the roles. So we should all start behaving, even if we are employed, as fractional leaders, right?
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. George, do you have any take on this when it comes to sort of the dynamic, the power dynamic?
Yeah, no, but I used to say that we founded Break the Box on the principle that it is built for people that hate consultants. I have despised consultants my entire career. The reason being is, first of all, external help has the tendency of being more valued than internal discussions. And there is always a very different timeline. So when you're permanently employed and there is a project that it can slip 2 weeks, it can slip 3 weeks, maybe next quarter, and things tend to sort of roll over. When you have a project that ends in 3 months, everything needs to get done in 3 months. And there is an experience, usually when you hire fractional people, they are experienced, they have done this ride before, and they're not there to build, to play with company politics, which is something that also happens internally a lot, or to make friends, or to position for a promotion or a raise in 2 years. It is a very specific scope, and what I see, it's a lot easier to mobilize around a specific objective.
Question.
From that position.
I'm going to ask a technical question in the middle of the webinar. Is it only me who hears George losing words in his sound on and off? Is that just for me? I'm just making
George was okay there. You echoed over each other a little bit, but yeah, it seems to be okay for most of that.
Yeah,
great. Just checking. It's just me, and I know your voice, so I'm okay. Go ahead.
Am I supposed to remember what I was talking about? Cool. No, but in general, it is a very different setup when it comes to both industry competence and focus on execution. We tend to sort of get a bit complacent, especially when we're with the same company for several years. And there is also an expectancy to look, if you're a VP sales and you're trying to do upstream, if you've never done that journey before, even when you are high performing, your team is doing great, the ramp up that you will need to learn that route until you're able to deliver is still long. So there is, as we said, there is a time and place for everything. There is a competence component, and then there is a focus, a sharper focus on execution that we usually find in most organizations.
But I also think it's kind of interesting because obviously me and George, we're doing fractional roles in the revenue and marketing side, right? I have worked with a fractional CFO at one point in time during my career, but besides that, I don't have a lot of fractional leaders outside of that space in my realm. But you guys probably have more of them since you're not only focusing on, we're very revenue heavy, right, on our side. is it very common, looking at what you guys have seen on the market, that you will do fractional roles even for other roles than sales, marketing, customer success? If you look at like internal function, HR, CFOs, these type of roles, if you look at your experience, whoever wants to take that one.
If I can jump in, I think absolutely. The CFO role is a fairly key one, and there's a few that are even in the building that Dan and I are both based in quite often, that operate in the CFO role and coming in, and that takes two different, from my understanding, and they'll probably tell me that I've got it slightly wrong when I speak to them, but is you've got the CFO that's very targeted on moving you towards a merger and acquisition or whatever it may well be, or a raise, and is helping to engineer the business to be set up in the right way, what kind of metrics and what everything are we working towards. And then you've got the more operational fractional CFO who's doing the day-to-day bookkeeping, but you want to have that, not bookkeeping as such and just general invoicing, but they maybe have another team in and around them where you're getting access to the fractional CFO, but they're also running the accounts team or the accounts function for you. So there's sort of, even in between a fractional and an interim, there's sort of a little bit between the two because it's an ongoing relationship. And then definitely the CTO role. I'm seeing lots more people, and fortunate to speak to some very good ones who have been in your large scale companies like you alluded to, George, your Metas and things, or even not, have been on a journey with a scale up startup and gone through that, and are now looking to impart that knowledge to companies that are on the parts of the journey that they particularly enjoyed. The difference between taking a business from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 is very different. And then from 100 to whatever it may well be, in terms of number of heads or indeed from a sales side, recurring revenue, it's a different skill set. And a lot of these fractional leaders will have a sweet spot that they want to work in where they feel they add the most value. And so, from my perspective, I think Dan and I, while we don't position ourselves as fractional recruiters necessarily, that is a function that we look to come in and do as well, where they maybe don't need a full talent team, or they do have a full talent team, but they don't have a lot of need for technical hires in my case, or go-to-market team. The internal team are actually dealing with their more day-to-day hires. So there's a different part that you can come in and add that value. And so from my perspective, I've definitely seen it across the board, really, across most functions. And so obviously sales just seemingly is the one that makes a lot of the noise as well. And they're probably more prominent within LinkedIn because we're salespeople. So you kind of hear from us and we're more willing to do it than necessarily some of the CTOs and things who might not want to shout about some of the stuff they've worked on.
I think. Sorry, George. I think the CTO, the fractional CTO, is probably further down the line than the fractional CRO or VP. So, I think that's been in the market a long time and has been a go-to for startups. I think this concept of fractional revenue leader, whilst it's not, completely new, I think maybe like pre-COVID, it wasn't a thing, but now it's much more risen to prominence. So I actually think there's probably more areas that are more established than looking at fractional sales or marketing people.
I have a question for both of you, actually, because it's something that I've seen from founders, I've seen from CROs, pretty much everywhere when they're recruiting. There seems to be a big gap of urgency between the two roles. Which is between full-time and fractional roles, which, to be transparent, given how I have been in my career, I'm sort of struggling to understand. Maybe you guys have an example. I remember being asked or having as an interview questions like, okay, where would you feel comfortable to reach out to start a hiring process, or to a customer or to a partner or what have you? And people are getting surprised when I say that, look, a good person should be able to do that within 2 weeks. Once they understand how the company, how the product operates, they should have enough generalist experience, even regardless of if you're hiring fractional or a full-time hire, to do that. Otherwise, they're probably a bad fit for the organization. But I'm sort of, and I've seen that in old colleagues. I've seen that in customers organizations that we work to now, industry colleagues, etc. To your experience, have you seen a difference in urgency? And if so, where do you think it comes from? That's an offshoot question now, sir, I know, but I'm just curious.
Urgency in hiring, yeah?
Urgency in delivery. So I've seen a lot of people getting hired, especially as managers, and their ramp-up time is higher than it is for like an individual contributor, which to me, when you have 10 years behind you in building teams, in selling software, in setting KPIs and OKRs and all of these things, it shouldn't be 4 months, right? It's a lot of money for an organization to wait 4 months for you to pick up on something that you've been doing your entire career, technically.
Yeah, I personally haven't seen that. I guess from my perspective, my ICP, as a customer, are fast-moving businesses that have aspirations to grow and scale quickly in revenue, and then the people that need to do that. So by virtue of that mission, the expectations are high. So I don't tend to see that. I think, if we're talking about maybe the enterprise space where the deal sales cycles are slightly longer, then of course there needs to be, bigger consideration for that. But honestly, I'd see it differently, George, from a leadership perspective. I actually think on the flip side, where businesses, and again, this plays into the importance of fractionals, I think actually sometimes founders expect so much so soon from their leader that actually sometimes it breaks because they then haven't necessarily got their ICP sorted, they haven't got their strategy sorted. And again, I think one of the biggest value adds as a fractionals is it almost smooths the relationship between the founder and their first senior hire, because they lay the foundations for the understanding around what that hire means, why they should hire that person, just general understanding around expectations, and even like the lingo. Sometimes a founder might be so product and tech orientated, they bring a sales hire into the business, and then the sales hire is talking about OTEs, ramp, and they're like, what the hell does that mean? So I think it's just about setting proper expectations. But I'd say no, George. I think in general, to your point, I think the urgency is still there. But yeah, for me, those fractional people set clear expectations to make that hire more realistic.
It's an interesting question. I'm just thinking to myself, because it also depends on what you put into the fractional role in itself, right? Because if you look at a fractional, more operational role, then they operate in very many capacities like an employed leader, right? Because they're operational. When you look at fractional as a fractional role that is part-time and only on the advisory side, rather to sort of set the stage or set the scene for process building and stuff like that, it's different. So I think it depends on what the expectation is. And I feel like this is super important when you are a business looking to get a fractional or looking to hire a leader in a position based on you doing a new motion or based on you going into a new country or based on whatever you're doing, right? That you need to have a clear understanding. What is this person here to do? And it's the same when you employ, right? What is this person here to do and in what timeline? And I think that when we do, as companies, when we hire, we have a tendency of not being so clear with that. Like from a feedback perspective to the people who are looking to hire people, I'm sure you guys can sort of attest to that when you look at recruitment process and you're like, but what exactly is it that you want here? Because these things don't correlate. What you're telling me doesn't correlate with the other thing you said about what you need this hire to have. And I think it's very similar with fractional leaders. And I think if you are a business looking to hire a fractional leader, you and the fractional leader needs to be super aligned on exactly what's going to be done, right? And what is supposed to be on the timeline and when. And I think that that's one of the benefits too, because I have a sense that you put more pressure on a fractional leader than you do an employee, which is interesting, which also makes the fractional leader probably deliver a bit more urgently than the employee does. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be, when you're on a day rate or a retained rate or something like that, the expectation is they want to see that return on investment pretty quickly. And I think, George, you alluded to, would you expect to see that kind of 4-month ramp up or anything there? I kind of concur with Dan in the sense that probably not, because if somebody is taking that long to ramp up within a fractional role to do it, they probably weren't the right fractional leader for you to necessarily be hiring, and you should have perhaps been a little bit more selective or clear as to who can add value in that space a little bit more. Maybe use the better recruitment partner, or something like that to help find the right fractional leader that's already got not only the sector knowledge, but also the, maybe the geographical area that you're working in, or I'm obviously speaking a little bit broader across tech and not just the sales and marketing function. But I think if somebody was to come in as a sales leader or fractional CRO and take 4 months to kind of get their head around the product, I don't imagine they'd probably be getting a renewal past the 4-month point pretty quickly, and someone would be on my back to get a replacement.
But that's what I mean. Sorry, maybe I was unclear. What I mean is that there is a difference in ramp up when you hire a person and when you contract a person on fractional. I've seen a lot of recruitments where I sit in management meetings and say, yeah, but that person just joined 4 months ago or 3 months ago. Yeah. They're still sort of getting the head around things. And you can't expect too much because it's too early, because there is also investment when you hire somebody personally, right? Because you probably like them and you have vested interest, because it's also your judgment, right? When you have somebody on a contract, what I'm trying to say is that I understand why people hire fractional leaders, specifically in like quota carrying roles, is because you don't have that time, because these people cost a shit ton of money. You have a gap in leadership and you need the team to follow. So having a person as a new hire that takes 4 to 6 months to ramp up, which in most companies sounds, at least for SaaS, it sounds like an acceptable period, because onboarding takes a month or whatever. And then there is team dynamics, and I'm not used to the product yet, and all of these things. While I feel that when I've seen fractional leaders, both in companies that I've been part of as a manager and now, that the expectation is that within the first month, you should be up and running fully. Which makes sense in both roles, either higher or fractional, because if you have not necessarily 22, but like 10 years or 5 or 6 years as a manager, I mean, these things sort of, there is an overlap, even if you're a segment specialist, right?
Yeah.
So team dynamics, performance metrics, guidance and leadership, coaching, reporting, sales process, evaluation process, discovery, like all of these things should be in place when you start. Like you should be able to bring those things to the table when you start. Otherwise, to be transparent, what's the point of being there at all?
Yeah, I think it totally depends on stage, doesn't it? I think if you're looking to go from 0 to 1 million, then you'd probably expect the impact to be pretty quick.
This is why, because we're digging into this now, Dan. Give me a second to just say the question to the audience. So when should you hire fractional? Because that's what we've been talking about, right? Where is the stage? So please continue. I just wanted to, for hygienic reasons.
Sure. So, well, I guess the important thing to say is probably, that the fractional terminology is not a one size fits all. I think there are certain fractional advisors that suit certain stages, right? So I think probably the point I was making was, if you're a founder or a business leader and perhaps have no experience of running sales or producing revenue, and you want to go from 0 to 1 million, again, I'm talking about this through the lens of, sales and marketing. I imagine that fractional person that you're bringing on board, the expectation is immediate impact, probably in terms of messaging, meetings booked, pipeline created, and revenue, I imagine, relatively early, right? Where let's say the revenue fractional leader that wants to go from 1 million to 10 million, it's a completely different role. And maybe the impact that they're looking to make is probably more long-term thinking, is more strategic, and is more based on foundations of structure and process. So I think, to go back to the question, when to hire a fractional, I think it depends on the dynamics of what's involved in that business at that time, because some founders will generate traction from founder-led sales, and they may get to certain X revenue and then need help to take it to the next stage. and that might be an opportune time. Or sometimes actually it might be pre-revenue, and they just need somebody to get the wheels in motion, but it's not appropriate to hire a salesperson yet because they need more senior expert guidance. So I haven't actually answered the question, but I think
it's like a politician, Dan.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I just think there's too many variables, right? And I think in general, it's to help trigger a next phase of growth, but those phases of growth could be very different.
I think that, no, go ahead, Greg.
Sorry, Sarah. Is the one part of the document that we'll share with the audience afterwards is that misconception that a fractional leader is only for those startup or scale up, early part of the journey. And I think my experience shows that there's definitely a case for a fractional leader could come in at any number of stages. It could be just in a challenging period when you've got some other changes happening within the business. There's been levers or cutbacks or whatever it may well be, or stagnation in that market fit and how you're going out to the market from the sales perspective more so, or from a technical standpoint, struggling with the innovation is actually, does this fractional leader spark something new? Can they help identify promotions internally that can help to really move the business into that, like Dan said, next phase? Growth doesn't necessarily have to mean headcount or revenue. It can be, product growth and looking at the offering that you're providing out with part of your product that you're looking out to the customer market. And so I think that misconception that it's only early stage, there's fractional leaders who focus just on this, but there's also those fractional leaders that really don't want to operate in this space. They want to help that company move from 50 million ARR to 100 million ARR and go on that part of the journey.
Yeah, and I actually agree with this a lot because I believe that there are certain situations where fractional leaders fit rather than the size of the company, right?
Yeah.
So one clear situation, if you're a company and you have had a motion that looks a certain way or a geographical market that looks a certain way, and you're looking to go into a parallel secondary motion, as an example. Let's say that you have been running product-led and you're going to start doing actual B2B sales-led, right? This is a new motion. The company is not used to it. No one that you have hired so far knows anything about this new motion. So you need to have a person come in and build a new unit, right? And that person, you can either choose to hire a more junior person because that person is going to cost less from a salary perspective and they will be part of the building of the new motion. Or you put a fractional in whatever type of motion we're talking about now. You put a fractional in who is super senior. They build the foundation. This is like using a carpenter for your house instead of doing it yourself. So they build the foundation and then you hire 6 months later when the foundation is in place. And you give this new person a silver platter of all the things. Processes are in place. Everything is built. You can do this now because you have all the tools you need. Because one of the things that I have seen coming in as an employer, coming in as being employed, coming into new roles, specifically on the leader side, and realizing that under the hood, everything is a complete mess. No processes are in place, nothing is in place, nothing is functioning. No one knows what a process is. We need to build from scratch. Of course, my results will be a bit more tingent on the fact that nothing is in place that I was expecting to be in place, because when we hire, we have a tendency of painting the picture of the company we want to be rather than the company we are, right? So this is a perfect opportune moment. It's the same when you're looking at fractional HR. If you're looking to do an employee boost, you're gonna hire 200 new people the coming 5 years. Then you're gonna need a fractional HR manager who goes in and builds foundation for the next HR manager who's employed to come in and take over. So I think that this is about understanding when you do a new push of any kind of new motion, that this is when I need a fractional for a shorter period of time to build foundation. What do you guys think about that?
I wanna chime in briefly here. So I wanna say that in all of these situations, failing is super expensive. Sorry. So where I would rely on such expertise is cases where you either go into a new segment, into a new ISP, you go into an industry to sell into an industry, as an example, that you don't know. So hiring a specialist that has failed in that industry before, not on your dime, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, and has tried different approaches that can come in and give you industry knowledge plus contacts and the know-how to build a new team, as an example, as Sarah was talking about. Or if you're going to a new market, either geographically or from a company size perspective, or if you're mid-segment and you're going to enterprise. But for me, if I were to pick one, is if you have a company specifically in SaaS that was primarily inbound led when it comes to pipeline, and you're trying to do that famous shift from inbound, because we're not in the COVID era where people had triple stacks of everything. You go from inbound led to outbound led sales. I have found that shift with current management to be borderline impossible to do. So bringing somebody in for 3 months or 6 months to build your outbound motion, to train people that has been leading and hiring for outbound based teams, that has gone from 1 million ARR to 10 to 50, doing that motion because the brand wasn't known or the market wasn't ready or what have you, that has done that motion, instead of trying to move a VP sales or a CRO being used to 70-80% of his pie being filled with people asking for a meeting or asking to buy or please send me a contract, to having to reach your goals by reaching out to people and reaching out to the market. I would 100% say hire somebody to fix it for you. This is why so many companies suffer from that, and it's the famous shift. Every second customer I talk to is like, yeah, the main thing that we're struggling with is moving the company from inbound to outbound. I don't know. What do you guys think? You work with sales leadership. Do you? I saw Greg laughing in the beginning. So.
It's Dan's probably more the specialist on that space in the more recent years, but I can definitely understand the headache.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's such a broad topic. There's so much nuance to when as well. I think, like, typically what I see is the most classic example is founder-led sales who then need more help to transition from a predictable go-to-market motion. And I know that's a very simplistic overview, but that's what I typically see. But I think the biggest mistake, and I'd be interested to get your take on this, Sarah and George too, the biggest mistake that I see companies make is that they think that the first person they need to hire is their sales leader, and then they expect their sales leader to execute, do strategy, to build a team. So, often what I see and when I speak to founders is actually sometimes, one, you need to hire fractional first, but the first actual hire that you should make in terms of full time should be a salesperson, because they're driving through the strategy and actually executing and building understanding around what that process looks like to set the future leader up for success. So I think there's probably the when is where you're at in your journey, but so I do think that and I think this will be much more commonplace in the market. And certainly when I speak to founders, my recommendation is the first person you should hire is a fractional person. But I do think that combination of hiring a fractional person who helps them bring on a IC who executes is more important than hiring your leader.
I agree. There is no team to lead. Why will you hire a sales leader when you have no team to lead? I agree with this 100%. I think that one of the challenges when you look at startups, because when we work with smaller startups that are in the beginning of the journey, they have a founding couple, someone who's commercial, someone who's in IT, right? These are the combinations. I do believe that what you need is feet on the ground. You need people to go out and sell your product so you can get market feedback. And if you hire a leader, you're mishiring them. They're not supposed to be a leader the first year. They're supposed to be a person on the ground doing sales meetings day by day, right? And I think that having that expertise coming in, because you don't need a full-time fractional in the start. You need a part-time fractional in the start to go through hiring recruitment process with a partner or on their own, hire and get people onboarded on the sales side, and then get those people to come in front of customers as soon as possible. And then when you have a team, then you can hire a leader to replace the fractional role that you have, right? So that's on the small companies. And I believe that's the same on the tech side. If you're looking to go, a lot of companies are looking to go from a place where they're selling software solutions that could be sold completely online. You might need a fractional CTO to come in to make the product ready, or a product development person to make that product ready to be completely onboarded online without touch, right? If you're going to make that move. So when it comes to scale ups that we work with a lot, one of the challenges is also that you need, as a business, you need to understand where you're failing. And a fractional leader who has another power dynamic will tell you where you're failing, an employee won't. Like, this is a place, right? So I think it's important to understand. And I honestly, if I was running a business with a lot of people in it, I would set this demand on them. I would ask them as employees, if you were a fractional leader, what would you say to me in this situation? But that's a different conversation. I just believe that we need to have a clear understanding as business owners when we run our businesses, when to put people in, and when it's not going to happen with your current staff. Don't hire a leader, hire a fractional who can hire the team, and then hire a leader. That would be my recommendation.
Completely agree.
George, you look like you have things to say.
I've already said all my things, but when I can comment on the recruitment process, I mean, ideally you shouldn't hire people that will just nod their heads when they disagree with you. I mean, that's a whole different can of worms, right? So how we run recruitment process, and why I have been saying for years that, first of all, if you're an individual, if you're an employee, you should never get hired by sending your resume. You should always contact recruiters, for one. And B, you should always, depending on the role that you're hiring for, you should contact a specialist, because hiring commercial people is a goddamn nightmare. It's like playing the lottery. Maybe 1 in 20 if you're getting LinkedIn applications, or people are applying to Teamtailor or what have you, and running it from your own HR. HR has no commercial experience to judge their recruitment or to look at references. No offense to anyone watching from the HR side, but it just sort of is what it is. Again, one more area where failing is very expensive. And oh my God, failing in recruitment is so expensive. So I would say in all stages, you should have critical judgment and understand where you're lacking expertise, and be willing to invest in that expertise. Because at the end of the day, either it is recruitment or sales leadership or product leadership or what have you, lacking that expertise and realizing it too late is exponentially more expensive than getting somebody that you know can do the job from the get-go.
I agree with that. I have one more point too that I want to bring to the audience, because I was sitting here thinking to myself, how can I make it harder for people who work in fractional to get into contracts? So now I'm going to give a tip to the audience. No, but seriously. No, but because this is, if you're a startup, like whatever you choose, employment or fractional, it will still be your money on the table, right? So what I would do if I were to hire a fractional for my business, I would have them do a short audit of what we're doing at the moment. I can pay for it, but I would do it as a test, a short audit, and tell them, I want to know everything that we're fucking up. Tell me. And see if they will, because you will need that. That's one of the points of the fractional, that they're there to challenge you, mainly because you hire them as fractional because they know more than you do. So ask them to feedback you and see how deep-seated their knowledge goes in the structures that you have. You can give them access to process, environment, CRM, etc., to look through, and then give me where I'm fucking up. What do we need to fix? What's the priority? Once you have the answers that you feel uncomfortable with, because that's the point, that's the person you should probably go with, because they will keep doing that to you for the entire contract. Yeah. So that's a tip. Do you guys have other tips for companies looking to hire fractional?
Just contact me.
I think.
No, I think your point is, and I think actually a lot of fractional consultants that I see are offering that as a free service as part of the onboarding as well.
We do not. We don't offer it for free. Just saying it.
I think you probably touched on it a little bit earlier on, and George certainly mentioned just because somebody who you're going to hire as maybe a fractional leader worked in a well-recognized brand name, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be the right fit for your business. So I think really doing that inward look first and understanding what your business needs and what you're expecting of this person in advance of reaching out to a recruiter or in advance of reaching out to interviewing and meeting with fractional leaders is where do we actually need help? What do we need this person to do? And I think as long as you're honest about that, and that is being aware of your own deficiencies as a business, where do we not have experience? Not everybody knows everything, except Dan. But it's trying to understand that before you're then coming out, and then making sure you're on a clear journey of what you want to be asking of this fractional leader or whoever it is going to be joining your business.
Yeah.
And, and then doing your due diligence on them as well is, taking references, asking to speak to former companies they've worked with and understanding how it fit for them. Somebody who's done well in that space has probably got a few people that would be happy to pick up the phone and sing their praises. And so I think that's probably a relatively simple tip, but that's probably where I'd kind of start, I guess.
I think one of the things too about what you just said, because obviously we want to make sure that we do the right thing as business leaders, right? So my tip would be also start asking yourself the question whenever you hire a senior leader. Should I do fractional here? Maybe we should do fractional. Just ask yourself the question. Sometimes you will land in, no, we need this person to be a full-time employee, or yes, we need that because we have no one else internally who can help them do what they're here to do. So we need an expert coming in who can shape a new team or to set up a new motion or to set up a new type of event or a new country that we're going into, whatever it might be. And we don't know anything. So we need a bit more expertise in the beginning to get started and have a good foundation to stand on. But I think one of the things that people don't do, they don't even question this. Of course, we're going to hire. And it's even in certain countries where hiring is so expensive, it's insane, and you get stuck with people who after 6 months they will stay with you forever unless they die. Basically, it's very hard to get rid of them. This is Sweden primarily I'm talking about. But I think that one of the things that we need to start doing as business leaders is to ask ourselves, do I really need to hire this person, or should I go fractional? And we have like 10 minutes left of the webinar. I have a question, then I want a few minutes to discuss what do we think the future of this type of work will look like. So let me push the question into.
Before you do that, Sarah, you can push the question, but I want to add something in defense of the people that are not doing that just yet. I have to say that for an industry that is that experienced with sales and recruitment, I think the level of education in the market is pretty poor. People don't. This is also why we wanted to do this webinar together, right? Because people, of course, we're going to hire, because if you come from 10, 20 years of experience, the only context that you have is consultants coming from McKinsey, and you need to sell your liver to pay them. And there is a whole new generation of leaders now that are about my age, that are tired of being employed, or they feel done in their sort of learning curve being in corporate environments and want to take on new challenges that just was not available 10 years ago. In the same way, you had to, get the second mortgage on your house to afford a consultant to do even a 50-60% job. I don't think the market knows that this options are really available. I think we need to do both recruiters and people that are looking to do fractional work to do a lot better job to, for instance, not assume that people know what the fuck fractional means. As an example, right? Just to point a couple of fingers to ourselves. And with that, I will leave the mic to Sarah for the question.
Yes, let's push it out. So the question is, unsure whether it's been discussed, but how do you explain to founders and VCs that fractional is the way to go? Most founders are pushed by VCs or are very convinced themselves they need a head of marketing full time, even when they don't have a marketing team. That's a great question. Who wants to take it? Start.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think the sentiment with VCs has changed on that. So I think, from what I see personally in the network of investors that I deal with and work with, I think a lot have felt the pain of the overhiring and the mistakes that I made at the start of the webinar. So, and going back to George's point, I think it's just simply this fractional option. VCs just don't think it's a thing or consider it. They're just like, we need to grow, we need to generate more revenue, we need to become profitable, we just need to go and hire somebody. So
Not so much the VCs, you mean the founders. Sorry, Dan.
No, but I mean the VCs that are in this position now who are thinking and advising their businesses, right? So I think a lot of it is probably explaining to the investment firms about the mistakes that businesses have made in the past, and what do VCs want? They want predictable, sustainable strategy.
Money.
They're going to get a return.
Money. They want money.
Yeah, and you need experts to get that in place. So
yeah,
I actually, without going to the end of the webinar, but it's directly linked to it, I actually think, Sarah, that what we'll see as one of the biggest changes is it'll be much more commonplace for VC firms to have a bench. It's not completely new, but I think it'll be very, very common to have a bench of fractional leaders that they work with and deploy into their portfolio as a first step.
We have already seen that actually here in the EMEA market we're working on. We have several assignments coming from that direction. So I believe it's moving too. I believe it's moving too, because I think that we need to understand that this is a low risk, high reward investment comparatively to hiring. So one more person doesn't equal more money. It's not how it works anymore, unfortunately, on the higher side. Yes, George?
No, I was about to say that it's interesting how the narrative changes where money is not free anymore. From a market perspective, now we're actually looking, it's like, okay, how can we have a decent ROI on that investment instead of just showing headcount to our board? We have one more question.
Yeah, I will show it.
We should do that instead.
So do you find that there are a growing pool of candidates who are positioning themselves as fractional leaders, or is this typically a request which has come from the hiring company? Do you find resistance from traditional CROs to taking on the responsibilities of a fractional leader? I think the first part here, that it has to do with that the hiring company will ask for a fractional. I don't perceive that that's the case. I perceive that the case is that they will look to hire and do it the traditional way. And then someone tells them something smart. And then they're like, ooh, maybe we should do this instead, which is very often how some of these conversations start. What do you guys think? Do you find resistance from traditional CROs to taking responsibilities?
I think from my perspective, I've definitely seen a bit of a growing trend, and I echo George's point around people in and around his age, and I'm of a similar age to George, and so we've gone through the last 20 years or so doing our career in a certain way, and now actually want to go about doing it in a different way and work on the things where we're really doing the parts of the job that we really love and enjoy, and we feel that we add the most value doing. So I think what you're seeing is the realization that remote work more so, I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole nother webinar, and there's probably been about 1,000 of them done already this week, but you can do this remote role in a senior leadership capacity where you add real impact and value to the company that you're supporting. And so I think that realization has spurned the fractional leader to come out more. There's always been consultants. There's always been people who are on contracts doing something day to day, but actually the person realizing, well, I don't have to be in that business 5 days a week to be the leader. I can still have an impact in the technology stack, in the in the sales stack or the sales processes, but only be there once a week or once a month or whatever's necessarily required, and still help to move that business along. And so I think it's a bit of a combination of the economics of the market, in that people all work remotely now anyway. We're doing this from Sweden in the UK. And, I'd say seamless as it can be, although my battery might die in a minute. But it's from that perspective, I think there's definitely more people wanting to do it because they realize that it's a genuine, career opportunity, and they want to be doing the stuff that they really enjoy.
To offer a slightly controversial point on that.
Don't contradict me.
No, it's the right point. I said controversial. I think it's super important if you're a business that you require a fractional, are you genuinely speaking to somebody that authentically wants to be a fractional leader, or are they just pitching themselves as a fractional leader because they can't get a full-time role? And there are two sides to that market. So I think that's a distinction that it's impossible to get to the bottom of that.
But is it really though? Because again, we're talking backdoor references, we're talking doing an audit, we're talking doing all of these things that will prove to you if they are in it because they want to do fractional work. Yeah. Because for me and George, I don't know if we love fractional work in itself, the concept. I like projects more, if I'm going to be honest. But as a setup, it's perfect. Because I want to come in, make a big change, and then leave it in the hands of the next person to manage and to handle it, right? I want to do those short sort of assignments. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to be employed, then you have a different challenge. And you won't last long, I don't feel, in the fractional space anyway, because you will have a situation where you won't be able to deliver on the fractional role that you get, even if you do get it, right? Dropped off. He left us. It's over time anyway. It's 5, so it's time to wrap up. I love these conversations today. It was really, really good. We had a short glimpse on the future, but we decided that enough is enough. We're not going to steal more people's time. Welcome back, Greg. We were just wrapping up. And I think that the future of the companies out there in SaaS right now is to get more fractional leaders in to make an impact short term, because that's what it will do for you guys, and everyone in SaaS is desperately in need of that. So with that in mind, do we have any last words from you, George? You look like you want to say something again. Go ahead.
I always look like I want to say something. I always want to say something. This is why I'm in sales for 22 years. No, I was about to say that I wanted to just echo what Dan said. I used to have used to be a running joke. Everybody that had self-employed with a company of 1 employee in their LinkedIn, it's like, you mean unemployed? So there is a lot of noise in that space. To be transparent, there is people that just left an individual contributor position. And want to now position as a fractional leader or whatever. And again, expertise matters in everything. Either it is recruitment or vetting or getting the right person. I think you should definitely get a person that can help you with that. And also, I mean, most things are online. Look at people's resumes, look at what projects they've been involved in, look at where these companies are now, to be able to make informed decisions. Because I agree, there is a lot of noise, much like normal or traditional recruitment.
Good.
Yeah. No,
go ahead, Dan. You have things to say too. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was, you reference your fractional leader. Do it the same as if you're hiring a perm leader.
I would do it backdoor though. I would do it backdoor. I wouldn't ask for references. I would just look through their list of customers, right? Just DM people on LinkedIn. Like, how was it? Just do it backdoor. It's my recommendation. I would say the same for hiring, by the way. Because the asking for permission and the positioning your best references is, I don't know, feels 10 years old.
Yeah, there's a whole other debate there.
Yes, another debate again. We have so many topics. Great, guys. Thank you so much for today. Thank you to the audience. This will be sent to you guys on demand after the session. And we will also follow up with the report that Dan and Greg has done on the fractional side. Super exciting news to get access to that. So I will email you all who is here, and also the people who didn't come, to get access to that. Thank you for today, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Take care.